Hello and welcome back. I'm Joseph Hoffman, and in this lesson we're going to analyze the form of Sonatina in F major, maybe by Beethoven, on Hunk 5 number 2. And we'll also talk about how to play it with maximum artistry. Let's get started by checking out the score. So let's first think about the form of this piece. You're thinking about form of an entire piece. It's very helpful to know where the sections, the major sections, each begin and end. So where does the first major section end in this piece? Can you find it? The first major cadence is down here in measure 18. A big clue for a section end is often a repeat sign. That's often the marking of the end of a major section, which in a piece like this will repeat. And another clue can be a cadence. And notice here, in measure 17, notice how this downbeat on 18 sounds like it could be the end of a piece. Notice again that feeling of arrival here on that C. And then the cadence is a little bit obscured or blurred by this chromatic scale, which is a transition to get us back to the start. So again, we have a cadence, it's a little blurred, brings us back to the start. So we would call these first 18 measures the A section of this piece. Now inside the A section, we have two main themes. We have this theme, and then a parallel phrase with that same theme presented again, just a step higher, but we could call this our theme 1. And then I would call this that theme 2, starting here in the pickup to measure 9. Now let's check out the next section. The same as our A or different? Well, we're using theme 1, but what happens? We've changed theme 1 and introduced this E flat, which it gives us a tonal shift, starting to feel like we're more in the key of B flat than the key of F. Common in a B section to start doing some tonal shifts. Now, one question we might ask as we're going is this piece in sonata allegro form? In a previous lesson, we've learned about sonata allegro form, and one thing we learned that the first theme in sonata allegro form is presented in the original key of F major, which is what we see here. But the second theme is presented in the key of the dominant. The dominant is the 5, which would be the key of C. However, this theme is still in the key of F, although eventually we start modulating to the key of C. We start to see these B naturals. But it would be much more common in sonata allegro form to see this theme in the key of C from the start, which isn't what we see. We're still seeing some B flats along the way here. So that's making me feel like maybe this isn't true sonata allegro form, but let's keep looking to find out. So going on in the B section, we see that we've had this tonal shift to B flat major. And that's facilitated by having these E flats. Notice anytime we have an E in this section, it's an E flat, which is making us feel like, notice that B flat major tonality. But then we get another shift here. This line feels like it's in G minor, and G harmonic minor because of the F sharps and the B flats and the E flats. That's all going to make it sound like G minor. But then it keeps shifting. Then we get some F naturals, E naturals. Starting here, the tonality is going to feel very fluid, going through different tonal centers. And that's really common for the development section in sonata allegro form. So again, is this sonata allegro form? This matches a very typical pattern for a development section with all these tonal shifts, playing around with some of the original themes. But let's see what happens as we come out of the development. So now here we're coming out. We can hear that we're kind of transitioning out of the development back to something familiar. When our ears hear something very familiar that we heard back in the A section, we can call this a return to the A section. But what's wrong? This is not our theme 1. This has skipped directly to our theme 2. Remember, theme 1 is... But we don't see that. We skip directly to theme 2 here. It's like the composer's taking a shortcut back home for us. And then, as is often the case, we have what I call a little coda. Remember, a coda is a special ending where a composer might introduce something brand new to help wrap things up. So starting down here, I'd call this our coda, because we could end the song right here, the piece, I should say. Doesn't that sound like an ending? But it might be a little bit anticlimactic to just end there, so we extend that with a coda to give us a more grand finale. So the question is, again, sonata allegro form or not? We saw that we started with an A section, which repeated, and then we had a B section, and then we returned to an A section, but it's a modified A section, just doing theme 2, then a coda at the end. The things that don't match sonata allegro form are that we didn't present both themes in the original form, so this isn't a true recapitulation like we would see in typical sonata allegro form. Also, we had some differences too in that theme 2 wasn't clearly in the key of the dominant. So my vote would be this is not sonata allegro form, but it is ternary form with an A, B, A section. Why take the trouble to think so much about the form? As the performer, you need to know where you are in your story to know how to tell the story the best. We want to feel like we've come home when we get here. We need to feel like we're going for a wild journey in the B section, like we're going away from home, so then we get that feeling of return in the final A. Having this kind of map in your mind helps you, as you play a piece, know where you are and where you're headed. Now, let's talk about artistry. I think it's important as you play to think about climax points in your music. A climax point is like the peak of a mountain, the most exciting, often the loudest note in a phrase. And I've marked with a star some of my climax points. When you see a whole bunch of notes that are just a repeat, you don't want them to all sound the same. You want to feel like they're growing. So even if the composer doesn't mark it, these should probably crescendo to this climax. Dum, bum, bum, yada. And give that note extra emphasis, and that will make your decrescendo more interesting. Yada, dum, yum, bum, yada, getting softer, and then build back up to this climax point, and then back off. Your music will be so much more interesting if you find those high points, like you're going up a mountain, you hit the climax, and then you come back down. Here's another good climax point. Often you're looking for the highest note in the phrase. Often it's near the middle of a phrase. So here's another good place to crescendo. Another thing I want you to really always be thinking about in your playing is voicing. Letting the melody sing out and the accompaniment be in the background, softer. In measure 1, who is the melody? Who's the accompaniment? Anytime you have a broken chord pattern like this, that's almost always going to be your accompaniment. The right hand has the melody. So let the left hand be a little softer. I think about a mezzo piano for this hand. The right hand forte. All right? So practice the one hand who is not melody softer. Usually it's that right hand that has the melody. But are there any places in this piece where the left hand gets a turn to play the melody? The answer is yes. Let's look in the B section. Here in measure 30, the left hand. Remember with this pattern, up a fifth, down a third, down a fourth, down a step, that pattern is marked with some hairpin crescendo, decrescendo marks. Dee, da, 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 da. Make sure your left hand really takes the spotlight there and makes that a beautiful phrase. And then here in measure 34, the left hand gets another turn, right hand gets a turn, left hand gets a turn. We're going back and forth. Each of those should be a little beautiful mini phrase as the hands go back and forth, back and forth. And then here in measure 43, the left hand's back to accompaniment. So very gentle in the left hand, a little louder in the right hand. Make sure you're shaping each phrase where the last note is a beautiful phrase ending with a wrist float. Notice how my wrist floats as I get to that last note. Will you try that? Here in measure 43, play, float, play, float, play, float. That's another great place for a float. It not only makes your playing better, but it looks cool and professional too. You want to look fancy when you play. Float, float, float. Okay? I want you to not only sound good, but look amazing as you play with a really relaxed wrist, beautiful arm motions. Another important thing in a piece like this is to listen for smooth and even 16th notes. Whenever you have a whole bunch of 16th notes in a row, it should sound smooth and even. Hear how each note kind of flows into the next? Here would be a bad example. Hear how they weren't even? They sounded jagged and irregular. A good 16th note passage should just sound like a string of pearls just flowing along. Okay, one way to help if your notes are sounding a little jagged is using some of the fast tools. You can use fast fours. You can use long, short, long, short. Long, short, long, short, long, short. If you use long, short, you have to then, the next time, play short, long. Short, long, short, long, short, long, short, long. And then try normal and listen for a smooth, beautiful, even sound. Make sure those phrases have a shape too. Okay, da 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 da. Each note shouldn't sound exactly the same. You want there to be a shape to it. It should have a beautiful flow to it. And then here in the coda, make sure this trill has a very smooth, beautiful sound too. Just letting your hand rock gently. One E-enda, two E-enda, and on that two, we lift, play, lift, play, lift, sitting up nice and tall for a good, strong forte finale. Great job today learning about the form of Sonatina in F major, as well as how to play it with artistry. I hope you'll practice carefully this week, paying attention to the details of the score to make your interpretation of Sonatina in F major beautiful, exciting, and artistic. Happy practicing, and see you next time. Here's a question for you. Who came between Mr. D and Mr. F? That's easy. No, it's a Mr. E. Oh, brother.